guys, welcome back to the channel again. Today we will look at all the functions and major part of vector. So first of all, we will look at that what is a vector or why we need vector. So before only we have a array. So in the array, if you in the starting you define some size, then you cannot increment that size if you want. So that's why the arrays limitations are there. So to remove that limitations, vectors came. Now vectors, how to define vectors? First thing is that. So very simple syntax. Vector in these brackets, these angular brackets, we have to write its data type. Suppose it is int, and then its name, suppose v1. This is how we will create a vector. Now if you want to define its size, suppose I know that its size is n, then I can define, and then I'll go. So this is how we will define a vector. Now before that, let's define n. Now I just want to take the value, so how I'll take v1's I index and just see. So this is a simple syntax to take the values. It is similar to the array, but if you do not provide here any space, then you have to first take the value into any other value. Suppose here t. First you have to take the values into the t, then you have to push back t. How to push back? v1 dot push underscore back. So this is how we will push back the values into vector if you have not defined the size. So this is how vector works in the basic, that first of all how to define it, then how to push back the values into it, or how to insert the values into it. Now vector v1. Now I want to create a 2D vector. So what I'll do, here I have defined the size. So before that, in this I have created one more vector, vector of int. So this will be the 2D vector. Now in this case, this inner vector size is not defined. It can be variant, means you can have first like this structure, first this much number of elements, then this much only, then more than that, then less, then only one, then can have greater values. So this is how we will just look at all the things, or this is how the vector works. Now this is a simple thing which I have told you about vector. Retrieving the values of vector. Suppose you have pushed back 5 values till now. So let's make some changes before. Just remove this and remove this. I run the code, or it should not give any error, so it is not giving any error. Now let's try to print some element. Now suppose I want to print the 45. So at which index it is? It is same as the array, which is second index. So I'll just print v1's second index. Cout vectors second index. So I should get 45 as output, and I'm getting it as also. Now this is the basics of vector. Now if you want to print the whole vector, which is very simple in C++, in later C++ versions it becomes simple. Before only you have to print like this only, first of all I, then and this much you have to do. But now just define auto I and v1. and then simply cout I. So this much simple now became to print a vector. Before only we have to define like this. So we have printed this vector. Now what this is doing, or what this auto keyword is doing. Now auto keyword is nothing. It is just an automatic type define. It is defining the type of this I, which is the iterator, is defining it. Now if you want to manually define it, I'll give you a link such that you can look over iterators properly. Further in this video lecture or video series, I'll explain you all about iterators, but in this video we'll look at vector only. Now this is the printing part of vector. Now in vector we have 2 pointers predefined, or we have 6 pointers predefined, in which 2 are main. First is begin and second is end. So for that we'll just try to print cout v1 dot begin. Now what should we get? We should get an error. Now why we are getting an error? Because I am trying to print a iterator. That's why we are getting an error. So it is defined that this is a iterator. So we will not print it such that we do not get any error. Now what this thing do? Now begin just points the first element of the vector, whereas and v1 dot, which defines the last, means it does not define 47. It just points the last element after 47, the empty element or the next element to 47. It is pointing that element. So this is about and begin. Now we will look at 2 more things, which is reverse begin or reverse int. Now these begin or these values, now v1 dot begin you have defined, and now you have incremented it. Now before only suppose it was pointing this 12, now it will point 32, then again you will increment, then it will point 45, like this it will point. Now what this r begin is doing, it is a reverse begin pointer. So what it will point? It will point same as which one and is pointing, so it will point 47, or mainly it will point the last element of the vector. And one more thing, here it is r and, which will point the first element. Now here these values can be changed. This r value, or sorry, the reverse and reverse front, or front or and, these values can be changed, but I don't want to change these values. So I can put a keyword or put a word c, which defines a constant iterator. Now it can be reverse also, it can be simple also. So for that we have a simple c, by which we can make this a constant iterator. So I have told you the begin and reverse begin, reverse and, constant begin or constant end, and constant reverse begin, constant reverse end. These 4 things these 8 things we have done. Now suppose I want to learn more things about them. So for that we'll try to print the values till end. So how we'll print? We'll just iterate auto I like this only, but here at place of v1 we will define one thing, v1 dot begin. Now I'll go further. What I should not be equals to and, sorry, v1 dot and will increment I. So these are the values, and here at place of this I'll try to print this. So now let's run the code and let's see what happens, because there is a issue here. It should be equal, because that is for auto iteration. Now I have tried to iterate of using begin. So begin and end, we have iterated the values. Now I proved that how this begin and end works. Now let's try to do same thing with the constant. So this C and this C, and now let's run. So the values are same, but what's the difference between both the pointers is a constant iterator points to the first element. In that case, iterator is pointing to the first element of the vector. Nothing happens, but a constant iterator pointer points to the first element. It is good to be define a constant. That's why we have defined the constant. It doesn't matter. You can go with begin only. Now after this we'll look at the reverse parts which we have discussed. So for reverse, again R and R. Now let's run it. So from begin we are incrementing till end. So we are getting a reversed array. So now I proved that begin is pointing the last element of this vector. Whenever you will increment, this will go in this direction, and will go and will be pointing the previous element to 1. So this is the thing. Now same thing will happen with reverse constant and reverse constant. Now let's run it also. Let's do. So same thing is happening with this also. So these are some of the operations with the vector in which I have printed the values of the vector. Now let's change it to previous part. Simple I and this. So now I think that all the begin and constant begin, reverse begin, and that all things are clear. Now let's look at the size. So suppose I have pushed back many values into v1. Now I don't know the size, so how to find out the size? So for that also we have a simple function v1 dot size, which will return us the size of vector. Simple thing, but it's a good thing that size is 5. So the size is 5. Now let's try to find out that what is the maximum value, or how many values we can insert into the vector. So for that, what we have to do, we have to just change it to max underscore size. Now what this will return? This will return the maximum number of elements you can insert into this vector. So this is a very huge value. It is approx what? It is approximately 500 million. So it is enough for any test case. If you want one more good operation, or one more good thing about vector is the capacity function. So now what this capacity function do? It just returns the amount of storage allocated to this vector by its number of elements. So each number of its element means suppose 12, how much memory 12 is using, how much memory 32 is using. So it is just that thing, that how much memory each element is occupying. After that, resize the container means suppose I have a vector initialized before which have thousands of values. This much I have initialized, but now I require only 5 elements. Sorry, only the number of elements are 5 only. Now I want to resize it. So how to resize it? Just give a resize, and here the number of elements. 5. Sorry, we does not require to print it, so let's remove this both. So we are going good because it is resizing it, and it is what it is doing, it is just trying to it is just initializing all the values by 0 and resizing it by 5. Now let's see one more thing. Now till now we have not seen that how to predefine the values into the vector. So how to predefine it? Suppose this is a vector, now I want to predefine. So after providing the size, you can put a comma and then give the value. So initially all the values will be initialized by 10. So the initial values will be again initialized in this resize part. So this is the good observation, that after the resize, the values will be removed and new values will be appended, which we have initialized before at the initialization time. Now one more thing comes, empty. So now let's look at the vector, now let's look at this part, v1's part, that what this do. Now it is just checking one thing, that the vector is empty or not. If the vector is empty, then it will return 1, else it will return 0. So in this case it will return 0 because the vector has size 5. Now some of the more things come. Suppose we have defined this. Now till now we have discussed the things with the size, defining the size, incrementing the size, decrementing the size, resizing, just fitting the values and all these things. Now let's check, or let's do more things. Suppose assign. First thing, ASS IGN. Now what this do? This is the main thing. It just replace the new values of the vector and replace it by the old ones. So what's the syntax of that? Suppose in this we have to pass 2 arguments. First of all, we have to define it with respect of vector, then assign. After that we have to pass the values. So in place of 12, I am replacing it by something 132. So I have replaced it. So what this do? This just define starting 12 elements as 132. Now if you define first value, then it will define one value or first value as 132. It will resize also it according to this. So whatever you have done previously will be ignored and this statement will be prioritized. Now suppose see once more, or once see this all. So we have seen push back, push underscore back. This will push back the values. Now similarly pop back is also there. So pop back. Now what this is doing, suppose you have inserted some values, and now let's run, let's see the implementation, then we will understand that what it is doing. So it is not doing anything but just popping back the last element which we have inserted. So this is pushback, pop back we have discussed. Now assign we have discussed. After that insert. So suppose I want to insert at third element. So how to insert it? So for that we have an insert function, v1 dot insert. This is how we'll do. And insert, we want to first give the position of the new element and then the element, suppose 132. Now let's print it. Sorry, we have to define the iterator in front of it. So how to define it? v1 dot begin. So it will insert at begin. Sorry, v1. So this is how we will insert with the help of iterator v1 dot begin, which will insert at the 0th index or the beginning. Now I want to insert at second index, so plus 2. So it will increment two values of the begin int, and then it will insert. So it will insert at second index. So this is the insert for you. After this, erase comes. Now suppose I want to erase the memory, or I want to erase first element. So how to erase it? Just pass one value, erase, and begin. Now what this do? This will just erase the first value. So in this case, 32 will be erased. So the 12 will be erased. Now suppose I want to erase first value, so begin plus 1, which will erase the first value. So this will erase the first value. Now I want to erase more values, so simply I can iterate over that values. Now suppose I want to swap the we have discussed the swap functions. This purely work with the vectors. Suppose you want to swap two vectors, so you can also swap two vectors just by passing swap and passing the two vectors, suppose v1 comma v2. So the two vectors will be swapped after this. Now let's see one more function, which is clear. Clear, C-L-E-A-R, clear. So this will be also applied with v1. So v1 dot clear. This will delete all the elements and remove all the memory from the storage. So this is the clear operator for you, or sorry, clear function for you. So we have discussed more than sufficient things for vector. Now we'll try to just implement the previous discussed thing with this. Suppose I want to sort this. So for sorting, how we will sort this? So for that, just sort is sort v1 dot begin comma v1 dot end. So this is how we have to define the sort. So now our vector is sorted. So whenever or wherever you require vector, you have to just pass v1 begin and v1 end in all the STL functions where we have passed the array. Simply you have to pass this. Suppose you have to find the min element, min underscore element. So again v1 dot begin and v1 dot end. So this will find the minimum element among all the elements. So I am not printing it, so first of all I'll print it. So it is a pointer, that's why I am defining this. So now this will get us our answer 12. So we get our answer as 12. This is very simple. We have to just pass v1 dot begin and v1 dot end, first value and last value. So these are the two iterators. So you do not need to confuse between begin and end, or begin, reverse begin. That are very basics, or that are very high level things. You do not require to study that, but I have informed you that this much things are also there in vector. So all your competitive work will be done with this begin and end only. You do not require to use reverse begin or reverse end and that constant and that all. So I have discussed more than sufficient knowledge of vector, in which all the functions of the vector which is predefined and how to implement the previous vectors, or sorry, previous functions also. So this is all about vector. Now we'll just wrap up with the vector only. So in the next video we'll just look at the list. So for that, subscribe my channel and don't forget to share and like my videos, and do not forget to comment if I forgot anything or if I missed anything about vector. I'll cover that thing into the next video.